Hello, my name is Sonja Montiel. I am the founder of College Confidence. I am an educator, a mother of a fifth grader and first year college student, wife to my high school sweetheart, and a soccer player through and through.
And I'm Hilary Bilbrey, inspired living strategist, author, speaker, mama to 3 teenagers, wife, and adventure seeker. You know, some things are just meant to be. Although we met randomly in a class, Sonia and I really became clear that our work, our values, and our heart aligned. Soon we began talking about our families and our worries and our businesses, our lives, and we realized we were helping each other move forward into our own confidence and integrity.
And I remember, and then one day we were jokingly saying, we understand that many people have this fear of showing such vulnerabilities that you and I were able to get to so quickly. And it's because of that alignment. But that vulnerability and those conversations are really a way to get to the heart of the matter. And so, Decided Heart was born. And this is why we would love to invite you to join our conversations. So for today, with COVID, the strain of relationships when it comes to shelter in place is really weighing on so many of us. And Hilary and I, we both kind of resonated to that as it kind of took us back to some of our past experience on what distance does mean to relationships. So not sure if you're ready, you want to share first?
Sure. Yeah. And I think we have stories that sort of go back and forth and again, align, big surprise. But my first time that my husband and I were ever apart was actually when we were boyfriend and girlfriend. And I was finishing my last year of college. We were trying to get out to Colorado and he was a year older. And so I was going to finish and he got a job in Colorado. Oh, but guess what? 6 weeks before graduation, they sent him to Germany and said, right? They said, you're going to be here. And so we spent a year apart. And that year was actually it sounds crazy, so different than a couple years later, we had to be apart for a year. That year brought us closer together. There were no such things as, really cell phones or anything. In fact, he was over there, coincidentally or ironically, he was over there working with Mannesmann Mobilfunk, which was, they were consulting for them and they were putting in some of the first cell phones over in Europe. I know. So it was so crazy. So it was too expensive to talk on the phone. So we wrote letters, we did playlists, and we couldn't do like Spotify, right? So it was like the actual cassette.
Oh my gosh.
But it was really, we connected on such a deep level because our conversations were so short and far between that we had to really pour what we were feeling about each other into something very meaningful. And it really took away some of the other clutter and things like that. So that time, as much as that was hard and painful to not have him there, that first time there was some really neat moments in that. But I know that you had an even more stressful experience with your time apart with Richard.
It was. Whenever I share this story a lot, and I share it with the students, with teenagers that I work with, because of my age. So I think it remains one of the most painful memories. And it was probably because I was really young. So high school sweetheart. So I met Richard, I was a sophomore, he was a junior, and we really established this amazing friendship and connection but he was older than me. So for a year and a half, we're dating and having this amazing friendship. And it was time for him to graduate and figure out next steps. And he went to the Navy. It was a 2-year stint, so it was like a great deal. He had to have that in his life. He college was not an option for him at that time. And now I look back, I'm like, what an amazing, incredible experience for a young man to like explore the world, although being in the military demands so much of a human being. And I was kind of left behind, under this expectation of hold on to the relationship. And we didn't promise anything. I mean, we were so mature. We're like, whatever happens, happens. Because his second year of the Navy, I was starting college. And again, I I get, when other high school couples say, "Oh my gosh, how can we stay together?" I'm like, "You have a cell phone, you have FaceTime, you even have email." We didn't have any of those things. And like you said, Hilary, we had to create symbols and rituals.
Mm.
Um, and some of the letters that came from Richard, sometimes they were thoughtful and meaningful, but other times I would wait 3 months for a letter, and it was like this stick figure thing with a couple of sentences. And I'm like, that's all I got. That is all I got after waiting 3 months for a letter. It'd be so painful to have to wait another 3 months for the letter. And then I remember one time he went on 6-month tours, which means he's on a carrier on the ocean seas, and there is just no communication during those 6 months. And that he had to do 2 of those, and that almost tore us apart. And then getting a call, because no telephones on the ship, from the payphones. Do we remember what those are? Where you put
Yeah.
in?
25 cents.
Just landed at the United Arab Emirates, a big naval ship in a desert, and there's this long line of 100 guys for this one payphone. And so when it was his turn, it was all staticky. We had 2 minutes. He tried to put the quarter in, and it was just hung up. And then I wouldn't hear from him another 3 months. So,
Wow.
painful, but so important too. I mean, yeah. So, and then I'll share my other half, but because you have the part 2 as well, right?
Well, it's funny because, and I was going to ask you about if you felt that you were, was the painful part not connecting with one another? Was it that you were changing without each other?
Such a great question, because I think I was really trying to hold on to an identity that I was most familiar with, which was my young self. And that pain was a force of, you're not the person that you're hanging on to any longer. You need to let that go, kind of, what is it, the lava that breaks through the shell so you can become a butterfly.
Right.
But I was really resistant to that because it felt so good not growing.
Yeah.
Right? Why, if developing as a person is painful, why would I even want to do that? Right? Stay safe.
Oh my gosh, that's such a profound statement, and that resonates with me so much, because that was when Jeff and I were overseas. Then we lived there for almost 5 years. We lived overseas in different places, and after a couple of years in Germany, I realized I wanted to go back to school, and I was blessed enough to be accepted at Cambridge. So we had to go, right? That was a huge deal for me to get to do my graduate work there. And so we get to, now this is just a funny little time in history note. We move and we're going to live in Windsor, because that's like an hour drive for me. And then same thing for him to get to his work, because his work was going to be in a place called Slough. So we're not far from Windsor Castle. We arrived, I believe it was a Friday. And then Saturday morning, we woke up to the news that Princess Diana had died.
Wow.
Right. So it was crazy. And then, and that's a whole nother story for another day, but it was an interesting time to be there during that historical time. But 2 days later, Jeff's job got shut down there, and they moved him to Spain. And that was not so I had to move into a dorm. Well, first we had to make the decision. Does this mean that my dream is over and I go with him? Or do I stay here and move into a dorm last minute? We weren't expecting to do that. And do I now, as a 24-year-old, 23, 24-year-old young, woman who's been married for a year, live with people who are just coming straight out of college and still have that vibe and aren't, all of that?
Yeah, the maturity levels, right?
The maturity level, yeah. And so I did, and I decided to go. He went to Madrid, Spain, which, by the way, made for amazing reading breaks. When we had our reading breaks, that's where I would go. So that was cool. But it was so hard. And the reason it was hard is my growth, as you can imagine, just exploded. And my own identity, I didn't realize I was born to be a teacher until I stepped into the classroom, and I talked to my mentor, and she said, "Oh my gosh, Hilary, the first day that you taught, I saw you, and this thing happened in your face, in your energy.
Wow.
And it was like you said, oh, this is where I'm supposed to be. And I remember that feeling so well. And meanwhile, Jeff's career was going so well and he was getting accolades, but we were growing separately
Yeah.
instead of together. And we would get back together and it was really uncomfortable and hard. And we weren't taking the time to connect in the same ways. And I think there was some ego getting involved because neither of us were like, well, you don't understand what I'm going through. Well,
Yeah.
you don't understand what I'm going through, you know?
The mid-20s.
The mid-20s, exactly, kind of jockeying for who has it harder, but who has it more exciting and who,
Yeah.
it was so crazy. And when we finally got back together, you know, we talk about having a decided heart. That's our name. And we've come back to that so many times because so much of life is about that. You have to continually choose each other. And it's not just in distance. It's also, you know, daily. It's also, I mean, in the midst of this, whatever it is, being in a relationship, showing up for each other, it's a intentional decision every day. I don't know. Do you think?
Absolutely. And I never experienced that until finally Richard comes home. And when we were on our last thread, so Richard was supposed to come home in San Francisco. I was in Santa Barbara. I'm like, I felt like I wanted that fire. I had the fire still burning, but for him, I think it was dwindling out. And I said, I want to drive there and I'm going to surprise him. And he told me, don't bother driving because it's like an 8-hour drive, you know?
Yeah.
But it was definitely like our relationship kind of being a shadow. And he came home. We didn't see each other right away. It was 2 weeks where we decided to meet. Like here was this intense relationship that we left before this separation. And this, for the first time coming together and looking at each other was uncomfortable. I mean, deciding to be there was hard. And we were physically distant. I remember it was like, hey, let's go. And it was actually outside of a tennis court on a sidewalk. It was so weird. And we were about 15, 20 feet apart and actually deciding each step closer with our conversations, we're getting closer and closer, but we were relearning because we both grew so much. And we were deciding, who are we as individuals? And where do we integrate? Is there that connection still there? And because we took it slow and easier for us because we weren't committed to I mean, being married, I would assume has some pressure. Like it has to work. We made this bond already. We were still deciding if there was a future for us. So that made it, you know, looking from a distance, but at that moment, it was pretty urgent. And we slowly got to decide this is it. And that whole distance and that whole togetherness and the decided hearts that we've invested is our everyday. It is our everyday since. And it's been more than 26 years. And it's every day we choose. And then when we choose, we celebrate. And it makes me like choke up because like this morning, I told you, every morning I connect with Richard for 30 minutes before he goes to work. You know, it's like a 5:30 to 6, and it's just really anchoring that presence with each other. So.
I love how intentional you are about that. That just, it really sits, it just speaks to my heart. I think bringing it to today, you know, we have this girlfriend, boyfriend, we have people who, you know, like my son had seen a girl for one day, literally one day, and then shelter in place, and who knows, you know, whatever, or people who are have people overseas that couldn't return home because of this, or again, boyfriends, girlfriends, and even, you know, your sons and daughters, and there's all kinds of distance that we're seeing right now. And you know, what from your past in this can you sort of bring forward and offer to the people out there that are struggling with relationships at the moment, whatever they might be?
Yeah, I do think I'm looking back. I mentioned earlier that in that distance, Richard and I relied on these symbols or these rituals. And they were tangible things. So one of the things is, he'll call me and we'll both be, this is going to be like really cheesy, but it was so real for me. Like we're both looking at the moon at the same time. That moon represents us together. Randomly, he sent me a book. I just finished reading this on the ship. It was a torn up, it's Jenny Gerhardt by Theodore Dreiser, which became, like there was a quote that became, it was in our wedding invitations. But it was all beaten up. And for him to send that to me, and I got to feel what he just felt, that really helped. So, and I also have to say, I think it depends on the relationship too. Yeah, we have so much access with our technology, but like my father, I'm so close to my dad. That'll be another conversation, but the relationship between my dad and I is very, very tight. But he does not want to see me. He wants to call. He says, call me. Texting, FaceTime, Zoom. No, I want to hear your voice through that line. And I don't know, for him, maybe that tangibleness is important to him. So for me, it's like, what are tangible things that can connect in that distance? How about you?
Well, that's, as you're talking, it's really resonating with me that it's important for us to really, meaningful relationships, connectedness is about being caring enough, being understanding enough, being perceptive and discerning enough to see the other's love language, and also asking for what you need. But I think that love language is so important. I'm thinking, and this is an opportunity for us to get really creative in thinking about that. There's nothing more meaningful than someone really touches the heart of what it is. You're like, oh my gosh, you see me. There's an example of this gentleman that would visit his mom every single day in the nursing home, and he couldn't do it anymore because right now that's very dangerous. And so he's been calling, but he's been taking his lawn chair and setting it up outside her window. I know, it makes me want to cry. And so they're still talking, but they can see each other. And that little bit of extra effort, that little extra bit of thoughtfulness, my mother-in-law and my mom don't know, but for Mother's Day, we've already sent them a little something that we can do together on Mother's Day. So we'll call them, and so it's like, we can't be there for brunch, but we sent them a piece of that, and then we'll have the same thing, and then we'll all have the same thing. So I think while this is hard, I think if we really think about it, there are a lot of, you and Richard are so good, but there are a lot of ways we take for granted our day-to-day relationships, or even beyond that. And so I think it's beautiful to really think about what would be meaningful for this person. And that's allowing you to connect in a different way and then get creative with it. I mean, what else are we going to do right now?
We can, and I think too, it's just never assume that the connection's there. I mean, because, yes, Richard and I have been intentional, but gosh, the inhale and exhale of a relationship, you get to this part where, oh my God, we disconnected. The feeling is a trigger,
Yes.
But what I've learned for me is I cannot assume that the connection is the same and that our decided hearts are at the same time. And I think that it's so important to really communicate the feelings that you're having and the way that to connect. Now I just mentioned Richard, but even with my family members, how, like you said, this is a way I'd love to connect with you, but maybe my mom, when I say I'm going to send you this kid, she might be like, I don't get this kid, and I don't want to be hurt by that. But it was never hers to translate it in the way that I wanted her to.
That's right.
So finding the love language of each, and then feeding into, that in terms of creativity.
You're so right. And I think not being afraid, we've talked about vulnerability. We talk about that all the time. And I think being vulnerable enough, and then it's a combination of vulnerability, of putting yourself out there, and then being detached from the outcome. I think we always think that generosity and kindness is about this two-way reception. But really, you have to be okay with your intention, do the best that you can, ask the questions, don't assume, like you said, but then be okay with the outcome, maybe be detached from the outcome and sit and settle and be happy with the gesture. Does that make sense?
Yeah, because it was one of my struggles. Yeah, I took time for me to, and then it was so selfish, when I realized, like, I put so much time into this and I'm not getting the reward back. Why did I expect it in the first place?
Right.
So what a great reminder, to give is just to give.
Yes.
It's not
Yes.
to like get something back, because that defeated the whole purpose.
No, no, that's what, so I hear, like, during this conversation, what I'm really hearing is, first of all, don't assume. I'm hearing make meaningful connections, have a decided heart that that relationship is important to you. Don't be attached to the outcome, but make the effort, because it will be worth it. Whether it, there's going to be some relationships that maybe even don't survive this, and that might happen. And that doesn't mean that that is wrong or bad or anything else, but it means that, you've learned something more about each other, and the hurt is sometimes an indication that something, there was a learning, there was a growth, there was a moment of importance. And so I think taking a breath and doing the best that we can, and asking, use your words, ask for what you need, ask for what they need, right?
Right. I'm saying and then just before we go, is right now I'm helping seniors imagine what life will be away from family, despite whether they're going to stay home or do online courses. But we all are believing, especially the seniors, like, I'm leaving home. This is my chance to be myself. And we do have this conversation of, that transition, there'll be moments of vulnerability and it's going to be tough. But in that time of raw emotion and pain and longing, this is a time you ask yourself, this is what I'm growing right now.
Mm.
This is where I ask, what is my new identity as a college student, as a young adult? And then that pain is where you can reflect, kind of overcome, kind of like, oh my gosh, this is too sad for me. I'm running back home to something familiar, which is what I shared with you, is like, I wanted to hold on to something familiar. So.
Right. Right. No, that's such a good, I appreciate you making that connection, because we think that we have to fight pain sometimes, and pain feels like too big of a word at the moment, but it is pain. But discomfort, sometimes it's just discomfort or dissonance. But the reality is I think the older I get, the more that I learn that dissonance means that I have to pay attention.
Yes.
And I might be about to grow. And I can't imagine, everyone thinks that I'm sappy when I say this, but if you think about like a seed growing, like, it cannot be comfortable to like break open, push through the earth, and that's kind of what we do, but yet we expect for it to be pain-free.
Why can't it be pain-free?
I know. But you know what? That's why we have each other to lean on. That's why we get to have these conversations. And I've loved our conversation today. It was such a great opportunity to reflect on how much I love my husband and the relationships around me, but also it was a great opportunity to connect with you too.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. It's always good to know where you've been and where you're going. So relying on our memories, and then igniting some of the creative ideas that we can kind of implement. So hopefully we will be doing that this week.
Absolutely. I'm sure we'll talk to, and if you guys out there want to talk to us too, let us know what your ideas. How do you connect with people, whether it's COVID or in the past? We'd love to hear your words.
Thank you so much, Hilary. You have a great day today.
Thanks, Sonja.